Oil. We wear it. We burn it. We put it in our cars. We smear it on our bodies. We eat and drink from it. It's contributed to tremendous progress in terms of transport and the availability of cheap, accessible goods. But it's also directly resulted in horrible wars, environmental disasters, and permanent climate change. Oil giveth and taketh away. Without crude oil, we might still be reliant on products made out of coal, mineral poisons, beef fat, insect secretions, elephant teeth, and dead whales, thus causing it to be stuck in a permanent Victorian status. But at what cost? It's very difficult to talk about climate change because to some extent we're all complicit. To be honest, I find the reality too scary to think about. So instead of being justifiably scared of the future, why not go back into the past and examine exactly how we got here? With the story of a man driven by greed and fueled by the pursuit of black gold at a time when the resource was more in demand than ever before. It's the turn of the 20th century, the rise of the car, the latest resource boom at a time where people didn't even bother contemplating potential environmental destruction. It's the most horrifying manifestation of the American dream. Don't bother washing your hands, it'll never come off. This is There Will Be Blood.
When I first saw you, I knew that you had a flame in your heart.
Ah yes, There Will Be Blood. This 2007 film was loosely based on a book by muckraking journalist Upton Sinclair and was directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, noted creator of tracking shot epics. There Will Be Blood is about an oil baron's furious, greedy scramble for wealth at all costs. But you probably know it as the originator of an infamous meme. But other than that, what on earth is this movie about? We start the film with our protagonist, Daniel Plainview, silently working at a small-scale silver mine, when a series of accidents cripple Daniel and kill his mining partner, orphaning the man's child. Years later, during the height of turn-of-the-century optimism, when the frontier era had well and truly ended and railroads stretched across the continent, Daniel Plainview tours the country with the child, HW, hoping to gain a fortune in the oil business. Following a tip-off, he ends up in the town of Little Boston, buys land and sets up a well, but his desire to become an unstoppable oil mogul is threatened when Eli Sunday, a weedy but determined preacher, gets in his way. Oh, and there's blood. So much blood. The blood of the dead, the black crude blood of the earth, the blood of Christ, and the blood on Daniel's hands. Paul Thomas Anderson's film at first seems like a simple tale of a man undone by his own greed. Daniel, after getting everything that he has ever wanted out of life, vanquishes his now ineffectual rival by brutally killing him, but ends the film alone, with no friends or family, or real reason for living other than material wealth. He's a husk, no longer a full man, if he ever was one.
I'm finished.
However, There Will Be Blood is more than just a morality tale. It's the tale of the weird world that many men found themselves in. And men specifically, for this is a man's world through and through. It's a tale of religion versus capitalism. It's a film about fathers and sons. My discussion of this film is going to be peppered with contradictions, as There Will Be Blood is one of the most atheistic movies about religion ever made, while simultaneously being a religious movie about someone deeply atheistic. Greed and punishment for lack of humility are pretty big themes in the Bible, and many events and characters in There Will Be Blood seem downright biblical. The burning of the oil rig can be seen as Little Boston's Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction of Daniel's creation by the wrath of God. Barring HW, everyone in this film has a biblical name. Mary, the good religious woman who helps HW break free of his own father. Abel, the man who was rewarded for his unquestioning piety by being defeated by his own flesh and blood. Paul, the man who tells Daniel about the oil, spreading the good news in the way that the biblical Paul spread the teachings of Christianity across the Roman Empire. The biblical Eli, priest and prophet? All of his male descendants were punished by being placed in subservient positions and dying before reaching old age, as punishment for Eli's sons using their positions as religious ministers as a way to fulfill their own greed. Eli Sunday is subservient to Daniel, and Daniel kills him far before his old age, punishing him for exploiting the people in his church. And Daniel? At first the name makes no sense. The biblical Daniel is a hero, captured and threatened with death, and surviving the encounter through the power of his faith and the resulting protection from God. However, the name Daniel itself means God is my judge. Daniel Plainview escapes true punishment by the law, by Eli Sunday, and by his family. In the end, the only punishment he suffers is from himself. If you believe in God, it will be only God who judges him, as only God knows the true extent of what Daniel has done, his greed, his falsehood, and his murders. The biblical Daniel also uncovers heresy by priests, much as Daniel Plainview forces Eli to confess that his church is a sham.
Say it like you mean it.
Daniel.
Say it like it's your sermon.
I am a false prophet. God is a superstition.
Well, it looks like Eli won't even have the opportunity for his descendants to die before their time. He won't even get any descendants at all. Oh, and speaking of male descendants, Daniel's relationship with HW forms the backbone of the film. Daniel introduces HW as his son and business partner, but later he distances himself from the boy and denounces him.
You're not my son.
Please don't say that. I know you don't mean it.
What's the truth? You're not my son.
Here's the conundrum. The whole film builds up an image of Daniel as someone who is not a good person. The notion of Daniel being incurably evil and incapable of loving anyone is supported by the last section of the film, when we see him cruelly reject his son.
You're an orphan from a basket in the middle of the desert. And I took you for no other reason than I needed a sweet face to buy land. Did you get that?
This is followed by a scene where he beats Eli to death, which should give you a pretty clear indication that any shred of goodness within Daniel has long since died. However, his relationship with HW is far more complicated than the last section would indicate. There Will Be Blood starts with Daniel informally adopting the boy as a baby, deciding for himself and for himself only to take on HW's care. This would have been a huge undertaking for a single man at the time. Daniel becomes HW's primary caregiver at a time when many men, and indeed many women, had little to do with their own children, and it was considered perfectly acceptable and even appropriate, depending on one's social standing, to pay another person to take care of one's child. It wouldn't have been unusual for Daniel to send HW away to live with a female relative, or to hire a nanny for him, but instead Daniel is a far more involved and affectionate father than the vast majority of early 20th century men. Having HW around is advantageous for Daniel, since he can use him to project the image of himself as a family man, as someone who is trustworthy. But that's a lot of effort to go to for the sake of appearances, especially in this time when it would have been unusual and unexpected for a man to take this active a role in a child's life. To put it simply, Daniel doesn't need HW around in order to be a successful salesman, and if he's just keeping him around as a prop, well, I haven't seen that much effort for such little return since The Lion in Winter, when King Philip has sex with Richard the Lionheart for 2 years and hates every minute of it, just so he could tell Richard's dad about it.
He asked me if I loved him, and I told him yes. Do you know why I told him yes? So that one day I could tell you all about it.
If Daniel is approaching HW from a purely psychopathic mindset, there's no reason for HW to be there, especially when his presence seems to raise more questions. People constantly ask about HW's mother and where she is.
Where's your wife?
She died in childbirth, Mrs. Bankside, so it's just me and my son now.
Where's his mother?
I don't want to talk about those things.
If Daniel's trying not to raise suspicion, he's going about it completely the wrong way. Would a callous man like Daniel really go so above and beyond simply to have HW by his side to vouch for his moral character? Or does he genuinely love his son and want to provide the best for him? A huge part of the conflict of the second act is HW's injury in the well explosion and Daniel's subsequent attempts to adjust to being the parent of a disabled child. He finds he can no longer communicate with HW and decides to send him away to a deaf school. Again, this wouldn't have been considered unusual. Disabled children were frequently sent to get special education, if not relinquished to institutions. By modern standards, this is considered rightly abhorrent, but in the early 20th century it was the norm. Daniel believes he's doing the right thing and is incredibly upset by any criticism that implies that he's a bad father.
Will make you rich. You spend time with your boy.
You just tell me how to run my family.
It might be more important now that you've proven the field and we're offering to buy you out.
One night, I'm going to come to you inside of your house, wherever you're sleeping, and I'm going to cut your throat.
What?
Eli uses this against him, forcing him to admit that he abandoned HW.
You have abandoned your child!
Say it.
I abandoned my child.
Say it louder. Say it louder.
I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my boy!
When Daniel rejects HW, there's a flashback of him being a caring and genuine parent. There's no denying that he later becomes a horrible and poisonous presence to HW, but the act of parenting him at least seemed to start as an act of love. Is his turn against HW because he can no longer communicate directly with him, thus meaning that HW is one of the few people who can't be seduced by his bullshit?
You've got something to say to me, then say it. I'd like to hear you speak instead of your little dog. Woof, 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 woof.
I'm going to Mexico with my wife. I'm going away from you.
That wasn't so hard, was it?
Maybe he felt that HW's love of Mary and desire to turn away from Daniel and make his own life was a betrayal of everything Daniel had ever done for him. Part of the horror of this movie is seeing the duality of Daniel. Does he have a capacity for love, or is he just incredibly good at faking it? Is it worse if he stopped loving HW when the young man was no longer useful to him, or is it worse if he never loved him in the first place? Every father-son relationship in this film breaks down eventually, culminating in physical violence. Eli hates his father for being weak and stupid, and too easily seduced by Daniel's persuasiveness. HW rejects Daniel's too little too late attempts at reconciliation. Daniel hits Eli to humiliate him. Eli hits Daniel. Later, Daniel finishes what he started. Daniel disparages both HW and Eli as less than human, barely worthy of being born.
Stop crying, you sniveling ass. Stop your nonsense. You're just the afterbirth, Eli.
No.
Slithered out on your mother's filth. No. They should have put you in a glass jar.
There's a few things that make this film different from almost anything else I've ever reviewed. There Will Be Blood doesn't have a hero. It's a duet between two antagonists, a dance between two different kinds of evil.
We're such old friends.
Daniel Plainview at first seems genuine and charismatic, nothing more sinister than a good salesman disabled in an accident, looking to provide for himself and his adopted son, but as the film progresses he gradually becomes more obviously malevolent.
I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed. I hate most people.
His disregard for others is flagrant. There's the strong possibility that every expression of empathy in his life is a falsehood. Daniel Plainview is a bastard because he doesn't care.
I've built up my hatreds over the years, little by little.
You have a gift for hating.
You're the expert. You should know.
That said, it's hard to know when Daniel's psychopathy begins and ends. He grows enraged when he finds out Henry Plainview, the man claiming to be his brother, is an imposter, and murders him. But afterwards, he weeps. He cares deeply for his son, but maybe he doesn't. He stops Mary from being beaten by her father Abel, but maybe he intervened in order to humiliate Abel. It's hard to know anything definite about Daniel, but by the end of the film, he's undeniably deteriorated into being completely irredeemable. Unlike Daniel, Eli Sunday does not begin the film as anyone near likeable. He's a whiny, petty religious zealot, demanding things of Daniel and running his church as fuel for his own ego. When Daniel promises employment, resources and opportunity for Eli's downtrodden little town, Eli's refusal to accept Daniel at his word doesn't seem so much like healthy skepticism of what we later learn to be empty promises, as it does a hatred for Daniel and his power and charisma. Daniel Plainview represents the kind of man that Eli Sunday should be if he wants to succeed at running his church. This is a battle between two different kinds of charlatan. On the one hand, you have Eli's religious authority, an appeal to control the population of Little Boston through fear and superstition. On the other hand, you have Daniel and his atheistic prosperity, his promises of wealth and independence and solid capitalistic glory. P.T. Anderson damns both sides as being just as false as each other, and both end badly, but it's easy to see why Daniel's vision is infinitely more appealing. However, for all the talk of family values that Daniel spouts, this is a film with almost no vision of family. There is no place for matrimony, motherhood, or any kind of female presence in There Will Be Blood, and even the families we do see turn out to be shams. No, the family is useless here. Instead, There Will Be Blood is entirely about a relationship between two men. Eli and Daniel are consumed with each other from the moment they first meet, and spend the entire film trying to tear each other down. No matter how much they play at niceties, they've always hated each other with furious intensity. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Think of almost any amoral male character from fiction, any psychopath, and they've all got one thing in common: a focus on sex. An easy way to establish a male character as being downright evil is to show his relationship with women. The average male psychopath will fuck. He'll have a fondness for casual, no consequences sex, and won't care about the feelings of the women he sleeps with. He'll sexually harass or assault women, treat them like objects. He might even murder them. But what does Daniel Plainview think of women? To him, they may as well not even exist. Plainview is never shown in the film as having any interest in women at all, not even in the basest, most lascivious way. He showers affection on his son, even if that affection ends up being false, but while he is perfectly happy to play at being a father in order to make himself more relatable, he never goes so far as to marry. Eli accuses him of being lustful towards women, but there's absolutely no indication of Daniel having any contact with women at all, outside of the briefest of conversations. Since HW is another man's son, there's not even any proof that Daniel has ever had sex with a woman. He mentions prostitutes when he talks to Henry Plainview, his alleged brother.
We can eat and get some women.
Take him to the Peachtree Dance.
This could be true, or it could be another of Daniel's many lies. And outside of this brief aside, there's no indication that he's interested in women at all. So does this make Daniel an evil queer? Possibly. He definitely has some of the traits that were historically used to code gay characters. I can't say I've seen many male characters use a cigarette holder before. Him being gay might add to his general falsity, and might explain the contempt that he feels towards women and family life in general. He moves in a homosocial environment, a world of business and deals and travel, and his adopted son is the only concession he has towards having a typical family. He conspicuously dodges any question about why he isn't married.
Are you married? What were you in jail for?
He's estranged from his family.
Our father's dead. Ernest died, I heard. I wanted to find you.
When?
3 months ago. I got a letter from Annabelle.
My sister Annabelle?
He talks about having to leave a town suddenly and doesn't want to talk about the reason why.
What did my mother know?
I don't know. I don't know if she knew and looked the other way. She never knew.
I couldn't stay there. Just couldn't. I don't like to explain myself.
It's possible that homosexuality is one of the many defects of character that Eli sees in him, another reason to despise Daniel and everything he represents. The relationship between Eli and Daniel is also tinged with a certain uncomfortable friction.
I need help. I'm a sinner. I've let the devil grab hold of me in ways I never imagined. I'm so full of sin.
The Lord sometimes challenges us, doesn't he, Eli?
Oh, yes, he does.
Daniel humiliates Eli, fighting with him in a way that feminizes the other man and mounting him as they grapple in the mud.
I'm gonna bury you underground, Eli. Oh! I'm gonna bury you underground.
Eli might be gay himself.
William Bandy is one of the finest members we have at the Church of the Third Revelation. He's eager to come to Hollywood to be in movies. He is very good looking.
But there's no real evidence of Daniel being interested in men either, no matter how much time he spends surrounded by them. Is Daniel impotent? There's certainly a lot of malfunctioning phallic imagery, but Plainview doesn't seem to experience sexual frustration or a sense of worthlessness due to his inability to function. The most likely explanation? Daniel Plainview was asexual. There's not even the slightest indication that he desires sex with anyone, and including a scene exploring Daniel's sexual preferences would have been so easy and so typical that the complete omission of such a scene seems incredibly deliberate. Now, unambiguously asexual characters are incredibly rare. It's an identity that's characterised more by a lack of something than a presence of something, so it's quite difficult to portray on screen. Is the character in question asexual, or do they just not have sex or a relationship over the course of the story because it's, say, a courtroom drama, or it takes place over the course of one day? Can you really tell a fictional character's identity if they don't outright say it? More importantly, if we assume that Daniel Plainview was asexual, is this representation positive? No. While Daniel Plainview is an incredibly charismatic and charming figure whom you can't help but liking at least a little, he's a psychopath. His asexuality might just be a character choice, or a decision by Paul Thomas Anderson not to have the narrative include any love interest for Plainview, seeing as the story is not about a romance. But if Daniel Plainview is asexual, there's the strong implication that he is because he's incapable of caring for anyone else. His lack of sexual desire indicates that he is a broken, disturbed human being, incapable of love, so abnormal that he can't even pretend to be interested in sex or in women. It goes without saying that there's absolutely nothing wrong with asexuality, but there's the strong implication that Daniel Plainview is asexual specifically because he's a psychopath. While it's interesting and definitely unusual to have this kind of character be asexual, you can hardly call it positive.
I look at people and I see nothing worth liking. I want to earn enough money I can get away from everyone.
But this is period drama, which of course means that I must now discuss There Will Be Blood's treatment of history. The movie was based on Upton Sinclair's 1927 novel Oil, but only draws on the first 100 or so pages. The book and the movie, however, draw from historical events, namely the Teapot Dome scandal, an insider trading and bribery incident in 1921 to 1922. Briefly put, Albert B. Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, had leased government-owned oil reserves directly to private companies. It was later found out that the private companies had been bribing him in order to have direct access and a lower rate. The leases themselves were not illegal, but the massive bribes Albert B. Fall had received were. The ridiculous meme-worthy lines Daniel spouts about drinking someone's milkshake?
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up!
These were apparently based on actual words said by Albert B. Fall when explaining just how it was possible to drain oil away from a tract of land that the driller didn't actually own.
Drainage, Eli, you boy. Drain dry. I'm so sorry.
Just goes to show, history can be way more ridiculous than anything you'd possibly make up yourself. One of the men bribing Fall was oil baron Edward L. Dehaney of the Pan American Petroleum and Transport Company. Plainview was apparently inspired by him, but the real man doesn't sound anywhere near as psychopathic. However, Plainview's magnificently Gothic mansion where the final scene takes place belonged to Dehaney and was built for his son. An absolutely crazy amount of films and music videos have been shot in the Greystone mansion, but There Will Be Blood is probably one of the most thematically appropriate for the setting. Although it's definitely entertaining to pretend that everything shot here takes place in the same universe.
A man like me is dead in places. Other men feel liberated.
In regards to the rest of the historical details, the mere fact that insane method actor Daniel Day-Lewis is in this film pretty much gives There Will Be Blood an automatic seal of historical accuracy. The costumes and production design and technology look fantastic and give a very real feel of this specific time and place. The setting seems incredibly present, right down to the sweat stains on Daniel's hatband. Johnny Greenwood's score is definitely anachronistic, but it's an insanely effective backbone to the film. There's a true feeling of dread to the music. From the moment the film starts, we know something horrible is going to happen, an impending disaster. The score is responsible for so much of what makes There Will Be Blood work, and it's impossible to imagine the film without it. Should you watch it? In case my thoughts aren't already clear, this is an absolutely incredible film. It's a challenging watch, and not everyone will like it, as there's not a lot to like in There Will Be Blood, but it's masterfully created, fantastically acted, and dripping with incredibly interesting themes and metaphors. The mood and scope cannot be overstated. There Will Be Blood has the eerie power of a silent film, in particular Erich von Stroheim's Greed, a similarly epic tale of a man corrupted by avarice. The rural Californian landscape cratered with mines is silent movie territory in and of itself, the perfect place for tales of adventure and western expansion and men longing to strike it rich. The first 14 minutes of the film even function as a silent film. There's no dialogue, the story is told purely through visuals, diegetic sound, and the barest hint of a frightening, droning score. This is in many senses a throwback to early cinema. However, There Will Be Blood doesn't just come across as an updated silent film, but as something gothic, grandiose and tremendous, full of shouting religious charlatans, people turning away from their fathers, and poor impoverished folk just trying to get by. It's an Arcade Fire album!
Lord, would you send me aside? 'Cause I just gotta move on, I'm wasting my time. I don't wanna live with my father's dead. You can't forgive what you can't forget. I don't wanna live in my father's house no more.
Arcade Fire's Neon Bible came out the same year as There Will Be Blood and has a very complementary aesthetic, sharing many of the same themes, not least of which is the sense of dread present in both works, a mutual love of increasingly dramatic strings, and the fact that Neon Bible was recorded in a church. Plus, if you're going to be uncharitable, Win Butler definitely has a bit of an Eli Sunday thing going on. The performances? Daniel Day-Lewis is this film. He's in almost every scene, and he carries the whole thing, working incredibly well to sell the character of Plainview both through words and through gesture and silence. I don't think many other actors could have been simultaneously charming and terrifying, ruthless and loving, and so hard to pin down.
So let's build a wonderful school in Little Boston. These children are the future that we strive for, and so they should have the very best of things. What are you looking so miserable about? There's a whole ocean of oil under our feet. No one can get at it except for me.
Paul Dano's Eli is a perfect Weasley foil to Daniel. He's earnest and you almost pity him, but unlike Daniel, he's thoroughly unlikable.
The doctrine of universal salvation is a lie, is it not? It's a lie. I wish everyone could be saved, but they won't. No, they won't.
Both he and Daniel promise big things and never deliver. It's never quite clear how much they believe their own falsehoods, but they certainly never fall for each other's. The rest of the supporting cast are great. HW is a very challenging role for a child actor, but first-time actor Dylan Frazier definitely holds his own. Deaf actor Russell Harvard as adult HW is great in the brief scene he's in. The film has a sense of bitter ludicrousness to it, especially in the last section set in Daniel's mansion. Daniel deliberately makes Eli's death silly, wanting to humiliate him even in his last moments. It's ridiculous as well as terrifying. You can tell that this is the work of a truly talented director. It's phenomenally well made. A true gothic gripping film, utterly consuming and compelling. Give it a watch and maybe go and listen to some Arcade Fire afterwards. So that was There Will Be Blood. I'm finished.
There is only so much oil in the ground. Sooner or later there won't be much around. Tell that to your kids while you're driving round downtown. And there's only so much oil in the ground. We can't get loose without that juice.
Now this is period drama.